Hi there, and welcome back to UBC Botanical Garden's Research for the Future. As a part of my journey through the UBC Botanical Garden, I've been exploring various research projects that shed light onto climate change. My goal is to examine these studies through a lens that is both critical and hopeful, understanding the challenges while also recognizing the growing understanding emerging from scientific research and ideas for future interventions. This week, we're looking at a research project that's exploring how plants respond to extreme temperatures. With rising global temperatures and frequent heat waves, understanding how plants cope with heat stress is more important than ever before. The results of this research were described in a paper titled Variation in Leaf Carbon Economics, Energy Balance, and Heat Tolerance Traits highlights the differing timescales of adaptation and acclimation. This may sound like a pretty complicated topic, but essentially, this paper is all about the capacity of leaves to adapt to changes in temperature. This research project falls within the field of plant ecophysiology, a field concerned with how plants adapt to their environments by adjusting both their physical structures and their functions. Plants have different strategies to handle heat stress.
To investigate these strategies, researchers studied 177 plant species from 157 families at both UBC's Botanical Garden and at the Van Dusen Botanical Garden in Vancouver.
The lead author of the project is actually here to talk to us today. Thank you for joining us here today, Nicole.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Could you please tell the audience a bit more about yourself and the research that you work with?
Sure. So my name's Nicole Bizone. I'm a fourth-year PhD student in the Department of Botany here at UBC, and I research plants and climate change.
So, what is the relevance of your project to climate change?
So when it comes to climate change, one of the things we need to know is how quickly and how well plants can adapt or adjust to cope with changes in the environment. And what we find in this study is traits that reflect leaf structure, like their size and their shape, tend to evolve really slowly over multiple generations. Whereas traits that describe leaf function or physiology can change really quickly as hours to days even. And this is important to know because models that describe or predict how ecosystems will respond to climate change can incorporate how well plants are able to adjust to changing conditions. And so this work really gives us better information about how plants can make those adjustments depending on the types of traits that we're interested in.
Next, could you please elaborate on the methods that you guys incorporated and also some of the results that were gathered in this study?
Sure. So every morning we came here to the garden and grabbed leaves from as many different species of plants that we could, and this is a great place to do that. And we brought the leaves back to the lab to do a number of things. So first we measured traits that describe leaf structure. So we weighed them, we scanned them to see how big they were, things like that.
The thing I find really cool about this research is the way it was enabled by the plant collections at UBC Botanical Garden and Van Dusen Gardens. This is what Nicole said when I asked her why it's so useful to study differences in leaf structure and function.
So in ecology, lots of people like to study leaf traits because they're relatively easy to measure, but can give us a real wealth of knowledge about how a plant functions and the role it plays in its environment. And so by measuring how heavy and how large leaves are, we can actually get a good sense of the rates of photosynthesis that leaf might have or its longevity in its environment, because characteristics of leaves are often related to one another, and there are trade-offs that allow us to predict function from really easy to measure things like mass and area. And so measuring leaf traits is really important to climate change because it allows researchers to gather a lot more information on more types of plants and give us better knowledge on the things we want to know about climate change.
So, as a researcher, what does climate change really mean to you?
Yeah, so to me, when I think of climate change, I think about the really incredible ability that lots of different organisms have to cope with changes in the environment. So for plants, in dry conditions, they can adjust to use water more efficiently, or in really hot conditions, they can actually cool off their leaves by evaporating water. But critically, there are limitations to these adjustments. There's points above which plants can no longer adjust to cope with extreme changes. And there are consequences to making those adjustments as well in terms of using a lot of resources.
Essentially, Nicole is trying to tell us that plants are capable of adapting to a wide range of environmental conditions, but there are limits to that capacity.
Okay, so before we wrap this conversation up, what do you think is something that maybe the average person can do to feel a bit more hopeful about climate change and its future impact?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I think the first thing that comes to mind is doing what we can to elect representatives that will fund critical research in biodiversity and climate change science. Staying in touch with what we're learning about climate change and biodiversity science can also be really important along these lines. Share these videos like this with your friends, and share articles with your friends that describe what we're learning about climate change and its impacts on ecosystems here and all over the world, to make sure that we are all equipped with the knowledge we need to make good decisions about who we want representing us in government.
Climate change shows us that many plants have an amazing capacity for adaptation, but at the same time, there are limits to that capacity. So, we can put hope in plants, but only if we are willing to respect those limits.
This may be the final video in this series, but my journey to understand what climate change really means is far from over. I've learned that research can spark hope if we're willing to listen. So keep asking questions, stay grounded in curiosity, and remember, even in a changing world, there's still room to grow. Thank you for joining me along this insightful journey.